Alan Quinlan, live from Limerick. Good morning to you.
Good morning, lads. How are you?
How are you getting on?
Good, thanks. Yeah, very good.
The game is actually, in some regards, hard to analyse on the basis that A, we don't have an England team, obviously, but B, we're not really sure where they're at. We've seen them play in fits and starts. What's your sense of post World Cup where England are at?
Yeah, we're not really sure where we're at. Really, I suppose pessimistic after Scotland, optimistic after Wales. But England are. They were really poor against France. France were good, and I just thought it was interesting. I had Jeremy Guscott on this morning on breakfast on the breakfast show with News Talk, and he seemed to say, and it probably summed it up well, that they seemed to have lead in their boots in Paris. They just were very, very dead in their feet, and they couldn't get any continuity or any momentum going. And France, on the other hand, were full of energy, and they just defended it incredibly well. And the game in Scotland then, I think, was better from England. They imposed themselves, which we know that's part of their motto and their plan. Whoever they play against, they try and be physically stronger than them. And usually, when they win games, that's a telling factor. So we're not really sure. I think if you take the two Vunipola brothers out of the Saracens team, the England team, it does offer a glimmer of hope to anyone playing against them. They probably have Tuolangi back, which gives them real power and strength in midfield. So it's hard to know where they're at. I think historically, after World Cups, teams who've been pretty successful and got to semi-finals and finals have struggled a little bit. Ireland probably have more of a cause to get back on track, players playing for their lives, playing for their futures in a green jersey. But this England side, it's hard to know. There's still so many quality players in that team. You look at Itoje and Cruz, I think they're exceptional players. The back row, Hill and Curry, world class. If they get near any breakdown, they're just brilliant players. So they've a lot of devastating players. Johnny May is probably the best finisher in world rugby and has been for a couple of years. So they're still a very powerful side, but we're unsure where they're at really, and are they being affected by what happened at that World Cup? The incredible high in the semi-final and then the incredible downer in the final. It can have an effect.
Yeah, Andy Farrell is still obviously very much in the honeymoon period in every regard, and he's doing his damnedest obviously at this point to put his stamp on it and make this group his group. And I guess in some regards the way that the last era finished, to sort of separate one from the other, and in doing that he's had very high profile people in this week. Bono has been in. Quinny, I'm sure that didn't go past you this week. Maybe more interestingly, Paul O'Connell has been in and about the place. Just listening to what Andy Farrell had to say about him, the reasons he was in to take stock, to get a feel for the camp, to observe and to come to meetings, to share his experience and to try to connect with the boys. Like a list of things that you would think that actually, if you were thinking about having him in a little bit longer than short term, like there's a lot of language that he's used there that actually might point to a bit of a longer relationship here.
Yeah, look, I think if I was a player in that group, I think you're obviously when you're trying to rebuild yourself and get a feel-good factor in the camp and put your own stamp on it, like Andy Farrell is doing. I was in many Irish squads over the years when different people came in, and you'd learn things from them. I think most notably for me was Padraig Harrington when he came in 2009, 2008, December 2008, before Ireland won a Grand Slam. I think he spoke about his experiences and what he'd achieved and how he went about that. And it's always interesting for other sports people to hear those stories. And that obviously had Padraig could probably claim that made the difference between Ireland winning a Grand Slam or not. But it was really incredible. He had won majors in the year or two before that, and it was just incredible to hear him. Someone like Bono coming in obviously is going to, I think the boys were saying, and it's been in the press about just being proud to be Irish and stuff like that, and sometimes those things can make a little difference. Probably more significantly on the playing front, Paul O'Connell being around the group, because I love the shot in the papers of himself and James Ryan having a chat, and James Ryan is obviously, I think, a world-class player, and he's been so consistent for Ireland. But just having Paul around there talking about his experiences, about preparation, and interestingly, Ireland have only won once since 2010, and that was obviously 2 years ago. It's been, a very, very, it's a very tough place to go, Twickenham, and for this Irish team, You talk about England having a bit of psychological scars. I'd rather be beaten in a World Cup final than being in Ireland's position, So it's a challenge for him. This is a real challenge. And I think it's probably completely flipped over, that there's probably more pressure on England to win this game than Ireland, because there's probably a bit more pessimism since the World Cup. And last year Eddie Jones talked about Ireland dealing with expectation. Even though they didn't win the World Cup, England, they're deemed at being right up at the top of the pile, really, and they probably have to carry a bit of expectation. And Eddie Jones is under a bit of pressure, and England are under pressure.
Will Paul O'Connell, is there a role there for him in the long term, Quinny?
The experience Paul has had as a player has been phenomenal, and his presence in the dressing room is always really felt in a positive way. He's just a natural leader, and that's well documented. I think it's different being a coach. There's some similarities as regards being a captain and dealing with players in dressing rooms, and Paul was very good at that. Obviously, coaching there's a difference where you have the tracksuit on rather than putting on the gear and going out and acting and being able to make decisions out on the field and stuff like that. You're doing it from a different perspective. But I think he'd probably admit himself he'd like to get more experience coaching, expose himself to more coaching than to take up a role with Ireland or with Munster or with one of the provinces. But there's always a role for having someone around with that kind of experience, because his presence alone lifts people and they can chat, and he's really he's probably more intrigued about what the Irish players are thinking themselves this week, and that's the kind of way he is. And he's probably shared lots of his own experiences of preparing and mentally being right going to Twickenham, and I think that was really interesting. And if Ireland win there, what will people say next week? That these things had an effect, and sometimes it is the small little margins, but ultimately Ireland they've got to go out and improve again from what they did against Wales, and if they do that, they're in with a good chance.
Just very briefly, what is the areas that James Ryan will be looking to improve in his career over the next few years?
Well, if you look back at his performances over the last 2 years, there's not a lot more the guy can do sometimes on the field. I think probably just having more of a presence at line-out time and being someone who's really kind of dominant at making the calls. You learn. It takes time, no matter how good technically you are as a rugby player, to run a line-out like you've got to do, and to get it to the level where Paul could walk into a line-out and just give reassurance to everybody by his actions, by what he said in the little huddle or as they're walking in. So the line-out calling is an area that I think Ireland need to get better at. And it's not just James Ryan, it's right across the board, where Ian Henderson or whoever's in the back row, Peter O'Mahony's so good in the line-out. But just to give a little bit more assurance, and their body language needs to be a little bit better. So, you'd love to see James Ryan being that really dominant figure, and he will grow, and he's growing more and more as the years, in the last couple of years. So that's one area that I'd love to see him be really imposing, winning lineouts, backing himself as well, but also calling and running the lineout.
He's obviously gone with the same team again. Quinny resisted some temptation for change. We've spoken over the last number of weeks about how it is that Six Nations in the cycle where it might be tempting or easier in some regards to switch things up, but he's gone same again. Right call in your view?
Yeah, it is. I think I thought maybe that they may go back to the back row that was picked before Scotland and bring Doris straight back in, but it's a daunting task, stepping in there for him, particularly, and he played a couple of minutes against Scotland. I think Peter O'Mahony played very well against Wales. So I still think our back row have a point to prove. They were very good against Wales, but I think they need to take it to another level this week, because Hill and Curry are just devastating, and they can, even if there is a bit of lead in some of the English players' boots, Curry and Underhill are just, they're all action, they're everywhere, and they can cause opposition so much problem and get big turnovers. So the Irish back row have to carry this week, but they also have to make sure that Hill and Underhill don't get near the ball.
Ronan O'Gara making a case in the Irish Examiner this morning for getting for Keith Earls effectively saying that Jacob Stockdale is not the player that he was. Like Stockdale himself, to be fair, this week saying that actually he's a better player now than he was in 2018. He's come on defensively. What's your view on our threat from those positions?
Yeah, I think he probably needs to do a little bit more. I think he's obviously been positive and he's a very, very talented player, a wonderful athlete. I just think he needs to use himself more, and I think it's not about making carries and scoring tries, because people are scrutinising the amount of tries he has scored. He just burst onto the scene 2 years ago, was incredible. But I just think the kick chase, I just like to see a little bit more anger or aggression from him. He's such a big man, and I think he could use himself better. You know, if Conor Murray puts up box kicks on Sunday, he's got to be more aggressive in the air. He's got to just be really aggressive in the contest. And I just don't think he puts that fear in the opposition winger when the ball is up there. So look, you can't. Some players are uber aggressive, and that's a natural way to play. Jacob is probably a little bit more. He's not full-blooded like that. Incredibly talented, but I just need that's an area where he needs to be a bit more imposing, just aggressively. And you just love to see him kind of run out over people rather than run around people. And if he does that, I think someone like Keith Earls is not obviously physically as big. He's a brilliant finisher and really electric. But I think the way Conway and Earls chase box kicks, I want to see Jacob Stockdale do the same.
Yeah, Conway was talking about that on the show last week, saying that he's actually learned to develop that as a skill, that he's obviously not the biggest man, not the biggest winger we've had, but he's had to teach himself that and work really hard at that. So you'd imagine if Stockdale perhaps did what Conway was doing in terms of his own self-development in this specific skill, he could be an absolutely amazing kick chaser because of the size of the man.
Yeah, for sure, that's it. And I tell you, when I played, and I played against Ulster, and if I stood in the back field, which sometimes one of the back rows drops back there, and if Ruan Pena was putting up box kicks, or whoever was scrum half at the time, Paul Marshall or whatever, I always think on the side that Andrew Trimble was on, you would be very, very conscious and mindful of the fact that even if you catch the ball, he's just going to smash it, or he's going to be diving through the air. He's just going to be straight in your face. And I think he was someone who kind of scared people. Conway's got so good at that. Dave Carney is really good at it. Keith Earls has improved a lot over the years, and Keith Earls' form in the last couple of years, he's one player that's been consistently really, really good for Ireland. And if Jacob Stockdale gets to that level, I think there was, and there probably still is, some creaks in the defensive side of things. But he's 6'3". He's over 100 kilos, 105 kilos. He's the size of a back row, and he's incredibly quick. He's a brilliant finisher. He's got a brilliant left boot. So there's so many positives there, but I just think it's that little bit of energy, aggression without the ball that needs to be a little bit better. And if he does that on Sunday, he can, and going forward with Ireland, he can. There's no doubt he'll be on the team. But I think he's become vulnerable because those parts without the ball are where he needs to get better.
Will Ireland's Grand Slam 2020, Quinny, still be on track come Sunday evening?
I'm not sure. I'm afraid to get too optimistic, Adrian.
Go on.
I think they're in a better position, obviously, and there's a little bit more optimism. England are not as strong as they were at the World Cup. You take the Vunipolos out of the team, and there's a little bit few kinks in the armour. I think Ireland will be thereabouts. There's no doubt about it. But I just think maybe that England are probably, their desperation to get a result as well may just edge it for them. If Ireland start the game well, and if they're anywhere near where they were 2 years ago with the intensity and the execution, they'll win the game. But that's the challenge. Will England allow that? So I think England will probably just nudge it. But I'm optimistic about Ireland running them very close, or even being in the mix right up to the end. Yeah,
but England to get it done is what you're saying?
Probably. It's one of those ones that it's kind of, I'm swaying a little bit on, and I don't want to go Ireland are going to win for just with the heart scenario. I just think logic would say even without the Vunipolos, England are probably that bit more composed and have that little bit of more power. But I do think that if Ireland create chances and take them early on, they could rattle England, because I think England are vulnerable mentally as well. But it's going to take a massive effort. So I think England will probably just nudge it.
Yeah, all right. Enjoy the games.
Cheers.